This week on the Legion Clubhouse, the end of the Legion. Seriously.
They were the heroes from the future, teenagers protecting the universe from those that would sow the seeds of chaos. Each had unique powers and abilities, and though they often had their differences, they came together to save the day as the Legion of Superheroes. Now, you can be a part of their adventures and learn the history of the future in the Legion Clubhouse.
This is a turning point for this show, ladies and gentlemen, because we are wrapping up the Volume 3 of the Legion with the conclusion of the Magic Wars, which I'm not really sure the whole point of this 4-issue arc. It feels like something that is a bit too rushed, right? To get everything.
Mm-hmm. It kind of felt to me like we have a tone that we want when we go into the next book, and we have to devastate as much as possible in order to get the complete lack of hope that we want. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but
it's kind of the opposite of what Marvel's been doing lately, where you fix everything.
At no point does it feel like there is no hope. Right? Because everything is coming at you so fast, even with a month between issues, there's not a whole lot of time to really process what's going on, because by the time this issue opens, they're already fighting the Anti-Monitor.
Archmage.
Yeah, the Anti-Monitor. He looks just like the Anti-Monitor.
He looks like maybe the Anti-Monitor's shadow.
Yeah, and the big teeth thing that he's got going on. Yeah, it just, I don't know, it doesn't feel like there are any real stakes, right? Because when the first part of this started out, it was, oh no, technology is failing. But by the end of the issue, we kind of fixed it. And then by the time you get to this issue, the last issue ended with the Archmage exploding out of Xerox. And then suddenly the Legion are all there, and we're like, okay, they're blasting him. They don't really know who this character is, except maybe he's magic-based. And then it's just nothing but a big planet. I mean, there's a lot of people that explode out of planets. And then it's just a big fight all the way to the end with something that is bigger than them. And I wonder, again, I keep saying, this volume should have ended with Crisis on Infinite Earths. The Legion didn't get to participate in that. Nobody traveled back in time, did they?
Yeah, Colossal Boy was one of the heroes assembled in issue 1. Not Colossal Boy, Dawnstar.
Okay.
Yeah, but the Legion was all over Crisis on Infinite Earths because, they're like, hey, we have to show the future, and then we also have Anthro for some reason because we also have to show the past. But
yeah, it just feels like this is we're fighting the Anti-Monitor moment.
I don't know. I kind of feel like the first, I agree with you that it doesn't necessarily sustain it, but the first 3 pages are one of the most frustrating comic tropes to me. And it's that our powers just don't work, because we see 14 Legionnaires assembled, opening up their powers, and they're shooting the cold and the lightning and the anti-cheese, whatever they've got. And the Archmage is just like, you cannot hurt me. I am the sum of all evil. And by the end of page 3, the darkness is coming to absorb them and blah, 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 fish cakes. But it sort of stops at that point. And then all of a sudden we have a moment about halfway through where Colossal Boy is like, oh, he keeps forgetting our powers. Still yuck. Like, I thought you established 5 pages ago that your powers don't work.
Yeah,
against him. So I don't even know.
Yeah, and so to me, the stakes are just not. I mean, there's nothing in here. We certainly lost a lot of characters previously, right? We lost Polar Boy, or Magnetic Kid.
Magnetic Kid.
Yeah,
we lost Quizlet.
Yeah, but I don't know. This just seems like, okay, everything's going to be fine. This doesn't feel climactic like it should. Now, granted, everybody comes together and they fight, and we get Brainiac 5 to come back at the last minute, which I argue that they ruined that by, I believe it was in the previous issue, Maybe not the previous issue, but they kind of spoiled that by saying, "Oh yeah, by the way, Brainiac 5 is still around." And it's like, no, you hold him off until the moment when it is perfect for him. Yeah, it was the last issue. He showed up and he's putting on the Legion ring. And it's like, no. That should have been in issue 4 because that's when the gang all gets back together. I mean, we get Dream Girl finally realizing the mistake that she's made with Atmos.
Decking Atmos.
And
yes.
then
5 stars, no notes. Punch him again.
Everybody comes together to fight this guy, which is what it should. That is what would later become your classic Buffy the Vampire Slayer trope, right? In the fighting the big bad, where throughout the season people drop off, or you think people are killed, or they've disappeared, or they've left the group, and then finally at the last minute everybody comes together and they're like, "Come on, we're gonna fight this together! Yeah, teamwork, high five!" And everybody works together to bring down the big bad. Unfortunately, they don't really bring down the big bad. The big bad brings down himself.
But they let him. And I think that in this case, that may be the smarter way out, because we've spent 4 issues talking about, oh, magic, all of this stuff. We can't deal with this. He's incredibly powerful. To me, as anticlimactic as it is, having the Archmage be the architect of his own destruction, it would be better than having these characters spend 3 issues going, "Oh no, our powers don't work," and then at the end just going, "Pew pew pew, we hit him and we punch him until he falls down." You know what I mean? We've seen that. We've seen that in recent Avengers stories. We see it all the time with Thanos. He's all powerful. No one can stop him. Nothing can stop him. And then literally the Silver Surfer just punches him in the chops. And I get what they were going for. And I do appreciate that they had a moment where the telepaths are all like, "Oh, telepathic." And then Block is like, "Yeah, I feel it too." You do see a lot of characters in kind of a different role in this issue, which is neat. But as far as the pacing of the 4-issue Magic Wars, I agree with you that the pacing is kind of stuffed. It's messed up because we spent too much time in issue 1 and half of the second issue, so 59 and 60, setting up things to where all of the fight sequence has to be in this part 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I think the point where, Cosmic Boy shows up wearing his little brother's clothes, I get what they were going for. It's supposed to be a big, powerful moment. And
well, yeah,
I do appreciate that.
Safe for Quizlet and
Shadowlass.
Oh, yeah, Shadowlass, because she's with Mon-El.
Yep.
Yeah, the whole gang's back together. I mean, we get Dawnstar, we get Dream Girl, the White Witch, Lightning Lass, Starboy. Yeah, they all come back in this. And I think that those are really cool moments. But I think it may have been a little bit telegraphed by the previous issue where Brainiac 5 is like, "Let me activate the Legion ring and bring back all the retired groups." And it's like, I don't know. I am still trying to figure out the point of this, because if we are saying, hey, magic is no longer a big deal in the Legion of Superheroes or in the future, which is fine. It's not like magic really did much anyway in this. Dream Girl's powers rarely worked. White Witch is only there if she remembered to get her daily spells prepared ahead of time, a la the instructions in the D&D manual. And so I don't know if magic is really, for lack of, I mean, I guess you have Mordru, but
you have Mordru,
and so he should have been. This should have been Mordru's last call, right? He's been, he's been trapped, he's been put away, but he's been gathering his power. That would have been better than Shenanigans Man coming out of nowhere that nobody's ever heard of, and we'll talk more about maybe why people haven't heard of this guy. But I guess there's just no stakes. If it had been Mordru, I'd been like, holy crap, we know what Mordru's capabilities are. We've followed Mordru all these years, and we know he is a bad guy. And so for if you would have switched this with Mordru, I think I would have liked this series a little bit more. But again, knowing that this is the end of the Legion as we know them, this is the last issue in this read along where the Legion exists as a team. Beginning in the next issue, there is no more Legion of Superheroes. And so this doesn't, no. What I'm saying is, if this is the point where you are jumping into 5 years later and there is no Legion of Superheroes, there is nothing in this issue that screams, this is where they went out and did the best thing ever. And it just feels like another outing. It feels anticlimactic for the end of this volume.
See, I actually disagree on the Mordru point, because I feel like Mordru is someone that we've seen beaten over and over and over. We've seen Mordru get punched in the face by Superboy. We've seen Mordru get beaten by essentially Shadowlass's powers, making him think, oh no, I'm trapped underground. Having this weird elemental force conceptually, to me, feels like a stronger setup. Now, I do feel like the fact that he's drawn as a literal void is a little telling, because there's not a whole lot of character here other than I am all that is magic. And the point of him being, the magic at the center of the sorcerer's world. He's the source of all of the power in the sorcerer. He's the source in sorcerer. So everything else is just the error. But I kind of do appreciate the bits and pieces of what happens here, because we start 14 Legionnaires assemble to fight the Archmage. 22 Legionnaires are present for the death of Xerox at the end of the issue. So it is a moment where this is a huge, big, giant schmagegi where Cosmic Boy comes out of mothballs. And, you have the characters that we've seen drop away, with the exception of Shadowlass and Mon-El, who's dead, and a few others. We see those characters come back because this is a big, big moment. It's supposed to be a big thing. And then, of course, you have that really cool cameo where they don't tell us that it's Amethyst, or, they don't obliquely, they just sort of scrunch by it. It's like the way Marvel used ROM when they didn't have the rights to ROM anymore. And if I didn't know better, I would sit here and go, did they lose the rights to Amethyst?
No, they didn't. They actually didn't. And and I just want to jump into one of the comments. From Doc Ryder. Just listened to the Magic Wars episode, and I found myself grumbling at my phone as if I could speak to y'all through my podcast app, which is cool. We don't mind if you talk back to us, Doc. The discussion of the 12 tribes was such a divergence into completely unrelated topics. If you know your comics history, the 12 tribes reference likely has little to nothing to do with Judaism. The 12 tribes reference is likely to be the 12 tribes, houses, clans, whatever, of Gem World from Amethyst, which were based on the 12 birthstones of modern Earth. I'm surprised Matthew's encyclopedic knowledge of comic books didn't dredge that fact up. You're right. Simon Del Monte then follows up and says, hate to say it, but I suspect none of us read Amethyst because it was a quote-unquote girls comic book. I went back because...
I read Amethyst.
I went back. Well, then how come you didn't know the 12 tribes and shut me down back then? I went back because I knew
never
that I had...
shut you down. I tried to shut you down.
No, you should have just said, hey, listen, there's the 12 things. I said, oh, okay. Because that was kind of my reaction. And then I went back and I was like, okay, well, what? Because I knew that I had some issues of Amethyst of Gem World. And what I had was volume 3 of Amethyst Princess of Gem World. What's going on right now when the Sorcerer's World and Amethyst and all these characters appear is Giffen just finished up a 4-issue run of Amethyst Princess of Gem World in like February of 88, something like that. So it's like this whole, which also is another surprise too, because if you've got a series that's kind of currently running or in the midst of running, why would you destroy it in another title? Which again, I don't know. There's a bunch of weirdness about this whole Gem World, Sorcerer's World, Xerox, White Witch, Dream Girl. It all is just like, I'm glad that they're trying to just get rid of magic for good, and in the
They're
end,
not.
in the Legion of Superheroes in the process. I mean,
I
so
think they're
let's just
actually.
say that everyone
Mhm,
grabbed this issue of the Legion at the comic book store back in '88, and they're like,
mhm.
I know it says never the end at the end, but everyone's thinking, crap, is this the end of the Legion of Superheroes? You know, the solicitation in our comic shop news said last issue. Do you think people would be excited about if this was the way the Legion went out? Do you think that this is a good reaction? Do you think that this issue would have gotten a good reaction from people if they thought that this was the final issue?
Well, here's the thing. I was reading comics and reading Legion when this book came out, and I knew that this was a relaunch because, and you don't see them here because this is one of the direct sales books that doesn't have the same ads that you see in the newsstand books.
Mm-hmm.
The newsstand books were full of ads talking about the new
Oh,
big
okay.
Legion revamp launch. So I knew that there was a new Legion book coming. And I knew that, as much as it was cool to see this final volume, I knew that we were going to see another Legion book kick off. So I feel like, yes, but also as someone, and I would have been, what, 15, 14 at this point in
88, you
time?
would have
This is
been
86.
18,
I would have
87.
been 17. Yeah. Okay. So you do have that moment where you're thinking, okay, I'm 17. I'm relatively genre savvy by this point, but I feel like a lot of people who were just reading comics, just we're here to read comics. Your TM Maples and your wacky Uncle Elvises and all like that. I think those people would have no problem going, "Hey, there's a new book coming." Now, do I think that a 10 or 12-year-old kid would automatically have read all of the books that came out to see those ads? Maybe not. But also, this is a point where the Legion is incredibly popular. So I kind of feel like this is one of those things where, oh, they're canceling it to bring it back with, a big hype filled revamp, kind of like they did in '84. They didn't actually cancel the original Legion book, but when they launched that second Legion title, this title, I guess, for lack of an explanation, and then you have the takeoff. So it's really hard because at that point I was not aware of, like, I don't know if there was a previews guide in '86
I
or
think it was just
'88.
the comic shop news or whatever. That's the only thing I remember.
Yeah. I didn't necessarily read that because I didn't want to know the news, but
Yeah, they
also
just slid it into my bag as part of my pull list stuff.
it should be noted that part of the reason that I'm almost certain that I did mention in passing the amethyst thing when we were discussing it. But it should be mentioned that I have conflated Amethyst Princess of the Gem World and the 12 whatever the hoobity hoobities with a similar book from a similar era in '86 called Lords of the Ultra Realm, which was drawn by Pat Broderick. And the thing about Lords of the Ultra Realm that was very familiar, very similar, was it was bunches of people and they all represent whatever force. There were 14 of them. And my brain thought there were 14 houses of the gem world. So that's why I didn't make the 12 tribes connection, because the number 12 in my head didn't associate with gem world. It was the number 14.
Mm-hmm.
Had you been complaining about 14 tribes?
Well, no, because then it would never have triggered anything with me. Also, this is the
I'm just
last.
saying.
This is the last issue that Paul Levitz writes. That's the other thing that's really weird about. I mean, weird about this. I don't know. I would go out. I don't know. I just, as the final 4 issues of this volume, I just thought it was weak. I really did overall. This would not be a high point for me.
I want to say this carefully because I don't want it to feel like a criticism. I think that you have been very critical of the second half of the
Mm-hmm.
volume 3 run.
Yeah.
And part of it is kind of the same reason, we talk on the Major Spoilers podcast about, more broad topics. And one of the ones that keeps coming up is the best Marvel movie. And people say, oh, Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Can't stand it. Part of the reason I can't stand it is because the character of Crossbones is in it. And I got kind of mired in the Crossbones to the point where I can't bring myself to watch that movie again and decide, is it good, is it bad? So I feel like this issue does not successfully pull off the big, the Grand Guignol or Guignol or however one pronounces the French word, the big schmagegi at the end. But it gets about, for me, 75% of the way there. We do have, hey, the espionage squad has their little 3-page reunite moment. And then we have, oh no, Ultra Boy and Dawnstar and Wildfire have gotten free. Well, what are they going to do? Magic says they got to go and look for help. Well, who's help? Help is the Legionnaires that we've lost over the past 12 issues. That's kind of nice. We see Cosmic Boy and his new Legion of Substitute Heroes in their second and final appearance, ladies and jelly spoons. And then, rather than them going into action, Cosmic Boy just leaves them behind and takes off with Ultra Boy. And I'm just like, well, that was a whole thing there. Why not use that? But then, of course, that would have been just another thing to shove into this issue. So on page 2, we get Colossal Boy going, oh no, our powers don't work. By page 16, it's, oh man, he keeps forgetting how powerful we are. Sun Boy gets that moment where he's like, haha, I'm the Sun Boy and I glow. And the White Witch comes back. You even get a little moment for Harlack, which, I mean, Harlack is A, not a Legionnaire, B, not a hero, and C,
I think only appeared once before.
I think he's got 4 or 5 appearances behind him, and it's always like,
I don't know.
Harlack, he's a Kund,
This is not the way that I would have gone out in this series, not with this particular arc. Because again, when you read these 4 issues, you have to say, what are they saying? And by the end of this, they are saying magic is gone. There is no more magic in this universe because the big bad destroyed it, and in the process destroyed himself. All of the people on Sorcerer's World have done their Tolkien going off into the West moment where they walk through the light portal. They're saying there no more magic is going to exist. So that's
not the way I read it.
I mean, that's the implication, is that magic doesn't exist. Is all the only people that stay behind are White Witch, Dream Girl, and maybe did Harlack stay behind? I don't know if he stayed behind.
Harlack did stay behind. But when we first see the guy who's not Fire Lad, the Fire Elemental, the Fire Teacher, he's talking about how we tried to gather all the magic on Xerox. Mm-hmm. We tried to keep it safe, but all of these things happened. Mordru broke free. The White Witch came out. We failed to keep it here. To me, the destruction of Xerox was less, we're destroying the magic. It's, now the magic is flowing out into the universe and it's going to go where it goes and it's going to, crash places and there might be magic. Basically, the balance of magic is gone. And so we can see things like, I don't know, maybe Mordru's going to come back.
Maybe.
Who knows? Yeah, that's kind of the way it felt to me. It was like there's no longer a central magical set of rules or a planet or any real logic to it. So you can just fling it out there and say, this world is now not just shiny, happy technological people, with phasers and replicators. There's also just magic people floating around at random doing magic stuff. So, and that is partially based on having already read what came after this. So
So again, if you're just reading this, not thinking about the future, that's what this book is saying.
Thinking about the future.
All right. So we're done with volume 3. Hooray.
If you enjoy the show, we would appreciate your support. You can find out more and become a Legion Clubhouse member at patreon.com/major spoilers.
Okay, there were a couple of other comments that people made. Jimbo Fett said, Legion of Superheroes number 62 annoyed me because of the death of what's his name? Magnetic Kid.
Paul.
It felt meaningless, and to add the virgin sacrifice angle to it was a bit over the top. I just got the feeling that they were just racing to the end with this one, which, again, that's kind of my whole point there. Alt Timmy says, For as good as it started, it breaks my heart that this series stumbles as they race to the end and faceplant on the finish line. The guest, quote, art, pointless death, and WTF choice of final villains does them no favors. On the bright side, it does make me feel anticipation for 5 years later. For all its faults, they had a vision and they ran with it. So, yeah, several of our readers are also kind of agreeing there in that. Alan says, I prefer my fantasy, magic, and comics to be comic booky, like Dr. Fate or the Spectre, interacting with a science-based world. I'm good with magic in the traditional Legion of Superheroes sci-fi setting, but Amethyst was too much sword and sorcery for my comic book interest, which is weird because I like some sword and sorcery fiction, novels and short stories. As such, I never actively disliked Amethyst. I just didn't really pay attention to it. So those are some comments from the Major Spoilers Discord, which you, dear listener, can get over there and join for free. There's a link in the show notes. We have a channel specifically for the Legion Clubhouse, and you can go in there and talk about the Legion to your heart's content. You can tell us we're wrong. You can tell us you're right. You can interact with other Legion fans, just like Jimbo, Fett, Timmy, Doc Ryder, Simone Del Monte, and Alan, the people that made some comments this week for our show. We appreciate all of you for doing that. And we hope to see you over there to talk about the next book, the next chapter of the Legion. It is 5 years later. We are, the Legion has gone through some changes. The creative team has gone through some changes. We no longer have Paul Levitz kicking off this volume. It's all Keith Giffen and Al Gordon and Tom and Mary Bierbaum doing the work on this piece. And it is definitely different. As I said, and I will say, a couple of episodes ago, I said that this Magic War thing was a MAGA wet dream because, down with science, all of this stuff. And I think the allegory that I made about the Magic Wars being very MAGA-oriented kind of holds true because United Planets have fallen into fascist chaos. And we've talked about this, how the police, the science police, have become more and more, again, fascist in how they're dealing with things. And when 5 years later, this first issue kicks off of Volume 4, it's pretty much a police state. It is pretty much an authoritarian dystopia that everybody hates. Now, granted, at this time, dystopias are a hot thing and have been ever since V for Vendetta and other Judge Dredd titles have jumped the pond. It seems to be the hot thing here in America.
The Reagan-Thatcher era was hard on everybody.
Yeah. And so we jump ahead 5 years later, and we do get little bits and pieces of what's been going on. We see that, hey, the Legion has been disbanded. The Federation of Planets has basically said we are no longer going to put up with this nonsense. In fact, by the end of the issue, we discover that the Legion Clubhouse, or their HQ, has been turned into like condo living, right? Come on down and live.
Flight Ring Acres.
Yeah, Flight Ring Acres. And so, it's pretty clear that, bad guys are still on the loose. Universo is on the loose. And we see some, maybe some implications of other bad guys that are out running around doing stuff. But for the most part, the Legion has been disbanded and said, no longer do the things that you do. Go back to your home planet. We don't need you anymore. Here's a shiny medal. Bye. And then they've kind of been forgotten, except for Sunboy, who apparently is wearing a pirate puffy shirt like Jerry Seinfeld was always worried about.
Sunboy has gone full collaborator, basically. If we think of this, that whole thing as a world under siege, Sunboy is just like, the guy in France who's just like, all is well. But it is interesting because we see at the beginning of the issue, the Legion is nothing more than fodder for reality television. And Sunboy is, a tool of the media. And apparently Timberwolf's ex-girlfriend, Morella, is now the voice of fate. But throughout this whole thing, we keep seeing little bits and pieces. Polar Boy is now a wanted criminal because he refused to disband the Legion when he was told to disband the Legion.
We learned that Lightning Lad is dead.
We do?
When charter member Lightning Lad sacrificed his life to repel the first Kund invasion, the small club
Adventure
of teenagers.
Comics number
Oh, that's what that
306.
one's.
He was,
okay, because they're
he was.
he's a totally different costume. I thought that this was like another Kund invasion, and
Oh, no.
he sacrificed himself for that.
He was later resurrected with
Well, I know
the
that
lightning
part,
rod.
but then put him in the right costume. Then
see, there's going to be a lot of that, and part of that for a very good reason. But yes, it's a whole thing. When we go through this issue, we really have come to a point where it feels like a lot more than 5 years have happened. The United Planets collapsed. The United Planets collapsed partly because Imsk started fighting Braille, which is when Cosmic Boy and Shrinking Violet apparently got involved in stuff. And she's in prison, and he's at home with his pregnant wife on Braille, which is now an occupied territory of Imsk. And there's just, it's ugly. It is an ugly world.
And certainly, Polar Boy is suffering from PTSD, which is interesting because to discuss that in 88, I don't know when the term PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, or disorder, was first coined, but I want to say it may have been right around this time because the Vietnam War had been over for about a decade before this kind of stuff came up. And so that's when we start seeing like the Rambo movies come in. We start to see now, certainly the Lethal Weapon, not Hicks. Hicks. Was having a mental breakdown because of some other reason not related to war. Yeah, Riggs. That's what
Riggs.
And so it's like, it's interesting that they are trying to touch on this concept of what war does to people. And I find that fascinating that they just kind of touch on it and then just kind of move on. And I think I think that's kind of cool.
And it does come up again. And honestly, this is kind of cool. I can tell you that it was about this time because ridiculously, there is a George Carlin routine from about this era, would have been about 90, I think, where George talks about how in World War I, they called it shell shock, and then it became battle fatigue, and then operational exhaustion. And post-traumatic stress disorder is an 80s thing. It's just a new term, but it really is kind of the same thing that they've been seeing. And yeah, it's fascinating, to use your word, to put it on Cosmic Boy, but it's even more interesting that Cosmic Boy having, his issue, having his emotional response to the war, having lost his powers, is still the first person that Chameleon Boy wants for his new Legion, which is good because we've always seen the Legion as kind of, intentionally so because they were a Superboy spinoff or a Superman spinoff, but they've always felt like we need the most powerful guys up front. We need a Superboy and a Mon-El and an Ultra Boy. And if you can't get an Ultra Boy, then we'll take a Star Boy. And if we can't get a Star Boy, then we'll just need the Bus Boy and Banana Man. But to start the team with the smart guy and the guy who's got the guts and, knows the history of heroism, that to me feels like a really smart decision. That's a really good place to kind of build the foundation of this new team.
Yeah.
Even as it happens in a world that is a lot more Star Wars than it was ever Star Trek.
Well,
if that makes
it's
sense.
like definitely, especially when we're on Brawl, it feels very much like Vienna post World War II, where you've got these occupied territories and it's a shambles and people are trying to rebuild. And so I find that that's all interesting because people are allowed to still move about. And then so that's how Cosmic Boy goes out into the wastes area.
Cosmic Boy does have super crimson clearance.
Yeah,
they do point that out.
But they do say that people have papers that they can move around. So again, that's very much like post World War II Vienna.
Yep.
And so it's interesting to see, that conversation taking place. I will say, one of the things that I really like in this issue is the color palette of the flashback moments. I kind of wish the entire issue would have been done in that color palette, just super subdue. Limited colors. They're super not bright. The saturation's turned down. I really like that for this, especially if you are really trying to make a statement about this is not your grandfather's Legion of Superheroes.
Right. And that actually is a really good example of how well put together, especially at the beginning, this creative team is, because Tom McCraw is the colorist here for the first time. And McCraw is amazing. And as much as I complain about, I have been complaining about Giffen's angular style, here, it's amazing. It looks so
the only
good.
problem that I have is that the eyes are super squinty. On the wide shots, everybody is
and
squinty.
Big square jaws.
Yeah.
If you look at, you have that Giffen style, and then Al Gordon is inking, and Gordon does some wonderful things with the inks where everybody looks older. If you figure, these are the Legionnaires that we knew from the Adventure era. They're probably your Cosmic Boys and your Chameleon Boys and your Shrinking Violets. These people are, pushing 30. They are at a major turning point in their life. So you see Chameleon Boy can look however he wants, but he's got crow's feet and lines, and Cosmic Boy is all scraggly with his unshaven beard and always kind of looks just a little bit filthy because he lives basically in a war zone. Yeah. And Shrinking Violet insists on keeping her facial scar that she got during the war because she's not going to give it up because it means something to her, which is such a Shrinking Violet moment. And of course, she does write home and say, "Love, Vi." And you don't know who she's writing to yet, kids, but it's going to be a thing. Oh, wait, she does say it. Never mind. She says her name right there. It's Ayla. So Shrinking Violet is in love with Lightning Lass, you see. And I'm not sure if this is DC's first LGBTQIA romance among characters, but it's definitely in the first 3.
I don't know. I was trying to think of anybody that we know for sure who would have been around before there. Batwoman was a character, but not the Batwoman that we know when they did that.
The Batwoman who is gay didn't come around until 2011.
Yeah. Even though, and again, I'm trying to think of all the current LGBTQAI characters on DC's roster and trying to think which of them were before this. And that's the first one that pops in my mind, but it was a totally different character. So yeah, you may be right. I mean, and certainly, what's going over on Constantine, Hellblazer, Books of Magic, those have a lot of characters, and certainly anything Grant Morrison would have been doing for DC at the time would have had a lot of representation.
Doom Patrol by this point.
Yeah.
So we would have. I don't know if we would have seen Coagula yet, but we definitely would have seen. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, like I said,
that was one of the things that, and again, certainly they're being subtle here, or maybe not so subtle. I don't know. It's fine with me. I don't have a problem with it. But I do remember that right about this time, there was a lot of that happening, especially in the Vertigo titles, and the stuff that would become Vertigo titles. That there was a lot of representation in that area there that I was very surprised with. Especially in Books of Magic, that kind of comes out late in that series, and some other places. So, I'm glad that, publishers like DC were embracing this stuff at the time, especially when characters who are in that community gay are often the butt of jokes. And it seems like, especially in this era of comic storytelling, it wasn't that way.
Yeah, part of it is we're not quite to the point where we get to that Friends era where, hey, we're comfortable making these jokes because, it's our way of kind of admitting that the characters exist, which is both terrible and also not terrible. But when you look at, DC specifically, especially in this era, especially in the Legion, but the Legion kind of exists in its own little island. It's a far-flung future, and you do kind of have with those Vertigo books as well. You have this is taking place in, not quite the mainstream DC universe. So you kind of have that, I don't want to say safety, but you have a wall where you can say, oh, well,
This is the
this
future.
character,
Yeah.
right. This character is absolutely gay because it's 1,000 years down the line. And by that point, we believe that nobody's going to have any issues with that. And again, it's kind of like Black
They've all
Lightning
seen
in
those Star Trek
1977.
episodes.
Yeah, it's like, for the record, they tried. And I feel like that really is kind of what you can look at, even when it's done badly. In this era, they're actively trying, and
Yeah.
I kind of
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah, no, it's good. I really love the data pad at the end, where if you read this, it gives
I
you
knew
a
you
lot
would.
more information on, what's been going on. I mean, it's blocks of text, so that's that.
Mhm.
But if you really look at those pages, especially on the right side, in how the each of the
Macaulay
feeds,
Omnicom.
yeah. But if you go up on the right side, there's these bars of color, and each of those colors is the feed that
Mhm.
you're reading. So, down at the bottom of the feed, there's the blue one for the Daily Planet. Then there's the green one for the personal comm from Taylor Wellington, Earth Prez. And then you get up to the top and you've got this official comm from Polar Boy. It's just really kind of cool how they do it. And then if you go down right before the Omnicom bit starts, there's this little pink bar. And I think that is a representation of how much is still left to read in that feed. And then you've just got the up and down. I just think that whoever thought of this interface, I really like that for whatever reason.
Yeah, some people would say it was Steve Jobs, but we know that it was actually Keith Giffen.
I mean, maybe. Again, you would probably need to look to Star Trek to see what they're doing. Now,
But
granted,
even-
Next Generation has not, or is just about to launch, which would be very different. But I just like this idea, and certainly, there have been. We're not into the age of the Newton just yet, although we're very close for the first data pad. So there's some of that stuff starting to crop up in future tech. But I really appreciate that, and I really like the design of that. I think my biggest problem with this issue, and really with what comes next before they relaunch again, is, and this is the problem that I had, because I think that this was the first Legion book that I picked up that I was like, let me see what this is about. And then I put it back down because I have no idea what the heck is going on. And I wonder if this is the point where the Legion, and maybe just comics in general, were, if you don't know your Legion lore, then this comic isn't for you, noob. And I'm wondering if there's an alienation of an audience by doing this.
Well, there are two answers to that question. Answer one is, yeah, you are 100% right. And I know my Legion lore. I knew my Legion lore in '89. Here is something that you need to know. And I say this at this point, and I say this as a warning for those listening. Tom and Mary Bierbaum are hardcore, deep cut Legion fans from all the way back in the
We've
API.
talked about them before. Yeah.
Yeah. And there are things that are coming that are going to be in this book that are never explained in this book, but are explained in the Legion of Superheroes source book, $29.95, available at Barnes and Noble's near the Orange Julius in the mall.
No,
near you.
Not Barnes and Noble. That would have been B. Dalton.
Oh, I don't know.
When does that source book come out? Do you know what year that it came
source
out?
book comes out in 1990, I think.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. So I mean that would probably be the biggest thing, is if you're into this and you're just like, I'm going to just jump in with both feet and I'll figure it out as I go along. There's a lot of stuff that you have no idea who these people are, what's going on. Now, granted, we do get an origin story flashback again. But I think that if you are a new person, or if you're a casual reader and you don't know your Legion lore, there's a lot of stuff that's just going to be lost on you. And that, I think, is a big barrier as opposed to a all new launch. right? Does that make sense? And I think with 0 Hour coming up, and we're getting into that next phase of Legion, the next volume of Legion, I just wonder if this is, okay, nerds, gather around. We're gonna get together in our little club, and we're just gonna push everyone else out. That's kind of the feeling that I get when I read this.
Again, I'm not saying it's not there, but I also feel like this is, we talk about in the era that these books are happening. This is how relaunches happened in this era. I don't know if you read the Challengers of the Unknown.
No, I didn't read that.
In 88.
No.
It's Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale back when they were both good. And it takes everything you know about the Challengers, most deep cut moments, like this one time June was 50 feet big, and it takes all of it and it just throws it into a blender and shakes it up and gives you something completely unrelated to that nonetheless constantly refers to that. Or Cosmic Odyssey, I know you've read.
Yes,
where
I did read Cosmic.
New Gods.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The New Gods are crossing over with the Justice League. And we have this whole thing where, these things are happening. And for some reason, here's this space team consisting of Superman, makes sense in space, a Green Lantern, the Martian Manhunter, Starfire, makes sense in space, Batman, okay, the Demon, Dr. Fate, and the Bug. His name is Forager. But that is another example of a book. If you read it, there's a lot of moments in there where you're just like, what? And the reason why is because they're relaunching it and they're saying, if you're the nerd boy who knows who, let's say, for instance, Morella Tau, who shows up in this issue.
Yeah,
you know Morella Tau?
Panel. Yeah, she's from.
Yeah, I know Morella Tau.
Ago.
Sure. She pops up. There she is. I love Morella Tau. I'm the three guys who know Morella Tau. You may say to yourself, hey, here's this cool comic book. What's going to happen? Why don't, we get more of this stuff? And so the real answer is the story isn't going to touch on that. That is there for the people who know it. You don't need that to read this book, because at the time I read this book, I didn't necessarily know all of the things they were talking about, but they do give you what you need to know, with the exception of, why are there blue creatures with no eyes everywhere? They're giving me the willies, and it's freaking me out, and I want them to stop.
Yeah. All right, dear listeners, that's where we're going to wrap it up this week. Thank you so much for checking us out. What do you think of this transition between the Magic Wars and 5 years later? Let us know over on our Discord server. Again, you can join that for free, and we can't wait to see you over there.
The Legion Clubhouse is a production of Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC, and is produced by Steven Schleicher. Your hosts were Matthew Peterson and Steven Schleicher. You can follow Matthew at Mighty King Cobra and Steven at Major Spoilers. You can follow this podcast on Twitter at Legion Clubhouse. If you have questions or comments, send them to podcast@majorspoilers.com. I'm Jason Inman. Until next time, eat it, Grandpa.
This podcast is copyright 2025 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.